Okay, is it posting now? Is it?
You're making me want to put on my stupid headphones.
Hey, there we are. Look at that.
Put them over my earbuds just for effect.
Okay, so the sound apparently on Facebook is not bad. So
Yeah,
now
that's not the sound I'm worried about. Anyone paying close attention will know I'm wearing earbuds and a stupid gamer headphones.
Okay. You look good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just echoey. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but why is yours echoey? Oh, open. Can you? What do it needs to happen here? Because I don't hear myself anymore. I don't hear myself echoing. I wonder if you need to open up Facebook and mute your video.
Facebook or in this Be Live thing?
Can you mute your video and be live? Or like mute your...
Wait, hold on. Cannot use live videos in ads. Oh, okay. I'm already muted on Facebook. That just unmuted it on Facebook.
Okay.
It looks like it's frozen.
I think it's really delayed.
Oh, I think this is testing my computers.
I'm going to just test the audio real quick. You want to talk?
Yep, I'm talking.
See how it sounds. Okay.
Talking, hello, testing. Yeah, there's no sound options inside of Be Live. I mean, it's not that bad. As long as it's not messing up the Zencaster, then whatever, right?
Are you sure?
In fact, it's not even echoing anymore. But that's because we're not. I don't know why.
Okay. I'm going to download the audio real quick to see what it sounds like, and then we can go from there. So don't talk. 1 second. I'm going to just test the audio. You want to talk? See how it sounds. Damn it.
Echoing?
Hold on. Where's your freaking audio? Brian? There's no echo, Brian.
On Zencaster.
On Zencaster, none.
That's all that matters. I mean, you are definitely echoing to me, but I don't think that matters.
Okay, and you're echoing to me.
I am.
Yeah. So
it just depends on if we can suffer through it.
Okay.
I think it sounds fine on Facebook, like whatever.
Hold on. Let's unmute this real quick. See how it sounds. On Facebook. It does. Okay. Cool. Hey, you ready?
I'm good, man.
Yeah. What do I do? A new recording here. You there, bud?
I'm here.
Okay, health check passed. Here we go. Pull up the notes. Are you there now?
Yeah, I'm here.
Now I'm not getting the echo.
Weird.
Here we go. I mean,
my Zencast. Oh, are we recording?
Yeah, that's okay. That's a perfect start to this wonderful episode of Sports Surge. Now we have your attention. everybody, and you are listening intently to us. So welcome to this week's show. Brian, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I cannot complain. Aside from somebody breaking,
yes, you could complain. Sorry,
I could complain. Did have some, could complain. Somebody came to our house, broke into our car, stole a computer. So that's fantastic. So that happened this week. But otherwise, I guess it's the weekend. Can't complain. Other than that, but you're good.
Yeah. It's nice out. 60 degrees, sun shining. Semester's almost over for me.
It's getting there for me too, buddy. It's getting there for me too. Hey, we have a really solid show, I think, coming this week. We'll jump into it here momentarily, but first, if you're interested, not interested, we suggest that you follow Brian and I on Facebook. We're just fb.me/sportsnerds, or on Twitter we're @_sportsnerds, or then on Instagram sports.nerds. But we're actually doing a live show at the moment, so we have nobody watching, which is awesome. Actually, it says Brian Schrader's watching, so we have one person watching the show.
My first Facebook Live. So
your first Facebook Live, we're doing it. So again, we find us on there. Find us, follow us. You can tweet at us. You can message us. All of this stuff. What we're trying to do is obviously make the world a little bit smarter when it comes to sports. And so today we're hoping to do that. Today I'm excited about this show. We're going to talk a little MMA, UFC, All-Star Wrestling, WWE, professional wrestling. And I guess to kind of to summarize why we've come to this, I think that you were really, really intrigued by the Conor McGregor story that happened over the weekend. Both of us watched the Andre the Giant documentary that was aired Sunday on HBO. We'll get into that momentarily. And then you also had WrestleMania on Sunday, which apparently was Rhonda Rousey's coming out party, and she's now found her niche. So let's just jump right into it. Let's talk first and foremost about the Conor McGregor story. For those of our listeners who have no idea what happened over the weekend, could you kind of summarize that?
So there was a big UFC fight. I think there was even a title on the line the past weekend in New York, and Conor McGregor, but by my understanding, was not even on the card. He wasn't even scheduled to fight. There's video from what looked like half a dozen cell phones at least of him, showing up, and he's in the sort of like tunnel area underneath the Barclays Center, and he threw a dolly or a hand truck at a big kind of tour bus and broke a window, and apparently a handful of fighters were on the bus, and a couple people got cut and got glass in their eye and that sort of stuff. A bunch of fighters were supposed to be on the card, ended up not being able to fight, and then he ran away, and the next day he got arrested. As soon as I saw this story, I posted on Twitter. So if you're following me or Sports Nerds on Twitter, you probably saw this already. It looked to me like a publicity stunt gone bad. That was my initial reaction. I'm trying to find my actual tweet here, but it looked like, and it kind of feeds into what we're going to talk about today, which is sort of definitely a theme inside of professional wrestling, like WWE, WWF style professional wrestling, that it's all about kind of having drama and build up and a narrative storyline that sort of creates interest in the fight. And that's what it looked like to me. What it looked like is they were trying to, build up some drama, some animosity between, I don't even know who Conor McGregor was trying to go after on the bus, but something that would sort of make the fight, make this fight more intriguing, potentially setting up a bigger title fight later that would draw more fans. And while I said on Twitter, this thing looked to me like it was a totally staged publicity stunt gone bad. The Dana White, the owner or co-owner, but the head guy at UFC is insisting that it was not, that it was a spur of the moment thing that no one knew was going to happen, and that it's disgusting, and he sort of disavowed it. So I don't know. It gets crazy to me.
So where do you stand on this? I mean, do you believe that it was a publicity stunt? Do you? If not, you're still on board with that.
Well, I still can't find my tweet. It's on here somewhere. But basically, what I said was like, this is pretty convenient that there were 25 cameras filming this thing from the word go, from inside the bus, from outside the bus. Like, why was all of that stuff going on? Why was he even there? You know what I mean? And then Dana White's talking about it. What seemed like 30 minutes later, it didn't take any time at all. Now, listen, I don't think the publicity stunt was. You sent me an article today that was from the Bleacher Report that says it was by Kyle Newport. And it was from a couple days ago, April 6th, and the title was Dana White denies Conor McGregor bus attack was a publicity stunt. And basically, inside of this, there's a short video from Dana White where he's like, "Why would we stage this as a publicity stunt? People got hurt." Well, listen, that's really ridiculous, right? No one's saying that the publicity stunt was designed to be Conor McGregor throwing stuff at a bus and breaking windows and hurting people. Like, I think it's a publicity stunt gone bad. But the fact that people ended up getting hurt doesn't prove that it was not a publicity stunt. In fact, it still was probably effective for the UFC. I didn't know this fight was going on at the Barclays Center. Did you? The only reason I know about this fight is because Conor McGregor threw a hand truck through a window.
That's right? A funny point. Yeah. I had no idea that there was even a fight. Dude, but you know me, I don't watch this stuff. I don't watch UFC. I just don't care about it. And I guess why this is a really good entry point for our conversation about sports and spectacle and professional wrestling in particular is that, to me, the UFC has pretended in maybe the last 15 years to be something that it's not. And that's like some sort of legitimate fighting sport. I mean, it began as a spectacle. That was what the initial UFC was. It was just fighting between dudes who had different fighting styles, and people wanted to see who had what was the most effective fighting style. And then it got away towards something that was tried to be more legitimate. And now, and I don't know if it's because of social media or because of personalities like Conor McGregor or something like that, it's becoming something much, much different. It's becoming a publicity stunt. But the UFC is failing to acknowledge that it has become that, which is, I guess, maybe why I love professional wrestling. You know, why that sport is appealing to me. There's something about the acknowledgement that is nice. You know, it's a welcome thing.
And we'll talk about this when we get to the Andre documentary, right? But they make a point in that documentary that people are sort of able to set aside their willing suspension of disbelief is a big thing for people who do media studies and film studies, right? Like for you to be fully engaged in like a movie, especially something that's, like Star Wars set in space or a fantasy movie, like you have to suspend your disbelief that it couldn't possibly happen and sort of be immersed in it. And that's what the WWE was good at, right? That documentary has people saying, listen, we watched this as kids. We knew it was fake, but at the same time, we got sucked in kind of by the drama. So you're right. The WWE and that brand of professional wrestling sort of it's an open secret that they pick who's going to win beforehand, and then they're not really punching each other and that sort of stuff. But it doesn't take away from it. It actually sort of makes it okay. But you're right. The WWE sort of refuses to acknowledge this. Like here was the other thing I thought about when I saw this Conor McGregor thing. Like, for Dana White to come out and say, this is disgusting, it's the grossest thing I've ever seen, all of this nonsense. Listen, you built your brand on this. The brand was, UFC got big when he had a reality TV show where they put all these UFC fighters into a house together, and they beat the crap out of each other all the time, and they ripped down walls, and they said terrible things to each other, and it was Big Brother meets UFC, and that drew in a lot of people and made them UFC fans. And even though I don't know if that show exists anymore, but even if it does not, they've still perpetuated that same sort of, we need drama, we need big time characters who say crazy things. They've got these pre-match stare downs that oftentimes turn into violence, up to and including with Conor McGregor, who's gotten in trouble for, when he was doing his tour with Floyd Mayweather, saying, not even, I was going to say borderline racist, but probably just racist things. And then saying afterwards, like, that was just us selling the product and making sure that we both had really big paydays. Well, it seems to me that it seems okay to suspect that Dana White went to Conor McGregor and was like, you need to do that here too, right? If you want to make a bunch of money, if you want to be the highest paid UFC athlete, then you need to drum up drama about this stuff. Maybe he didn't say, come attack the bus, right? Maybe the instructions weren't that specific, but I am certain that everybody who fights in the UFC knows that you have to, like a WWE fighter, you have to have a personality. There has to be drama. There has to be a narrative that makes people want to pay attention to these fights.
So do you think that, I guess, what is the kind of cognitive dissonance that goes into being a fan of these sports and pretending that they're 100% real, and even the build up to them is real, because I think the same thing happens with boxing fans. And I love boxing, but even, the show before the show is so much a draw of attention and all of that. Like, what goes on in my head and other people's head, even in, fans of football, baseball, basketball, to believe that none of this, that our respected sports are not a spectacle, because I think they really are. And
Definitely.
even yesterday, right, with the Rockies brawl and fans, I was looking on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and people posting about the brawl yesterday with the Rockies and the Padres, and people are so into it. Like, to me, there's no difference between that kind of spectacle and this, right? It's the same kind of thing. And so it's almost like professional wrestling, like I said previously, is a breath of fresh air, because it acknowledges its fakeness, right?
Yeah,
it acknowledges it. Yeah,
totally. Another example. This is on the exact same day you're referencing last week. There was a brawl in the Red Sox Yankees game in Game 2 of that series, which is the first time that rivalry match has sort of shown up in the 2018 season. And the response afterwards was not like, "Hey, let's not have violence in baseball," but instead it was like, "This is why this rivalry's great." You know what I mean? It was let's go back. There was literally, I've read articles and saw Twitter posts that were tweets that were like, "Let's relive all the great brawls between these two teams." Yeah, that is narrative, and gives us a sort of way to sort of structure and understand what's going on inside of sports. But I'll say too that it's not just violence is not the only way that happens, right? We do it in discursive and rhetorical ways as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back, and we'll continue this conversation. Okay, so can you summarize what you had just said, and then you jump back into like examples of what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, so the point that I made right before we went to break was that the examples we've given so far about sort of having a narrative that makes us more invested in sports or the outcomes of sports games or becoming fans in certain teams, while sometimes it's centered around violence, right? So WWE or the Conor McGregor thing, or brawls in like the Rockies game or the Red Sox game that happened last week, that it happens in non-discursive, or excuse me, in discursive ways too, right? As opposed to just, physical actions, that we tend to, sort of prescribe attributes to different players or different teams. This is especially true of baseball teams. We tend by the end of the year, for teams that are competing for championships, that are legitimate contenders, to sort of place narratives on those teams that give us sort of a way to root for them above and beyond them being from the city that we're from or the city that we like. So one example of this is when the Red Sox won their first modern World Series in 2004. The motto was kind of a cowboy up. We're sort of blue collar, a bunch of idiots just sort of out there having fun, and that was kind of the MO for the team, right? That they were sort of goofballs, that they weren't, sort of the highest class players, that they were a little bit, redneck or something like that. But that narrative made it easier to sort of understand what that team was, right? There was another Red Sox World Series team that was all about a bunch of dudes on the team having beards or whatever. But all of those are sort of narratives that kind of give us a specific way to kind of identify with those teams. So we're constantly placing sort of narratives or giving sort of tropes or lenses through which we can kind of like teams. And the opposite of this is true too, right? We can say we dislike this team because they're overpaid, or because there's a bunch of steroids players on that team, or they're a bunch of jerks off the field or something like that. So we're always trying to say we like certain teams or dislike certain teams, like players or dislike players, like fighters or dislike fighters, because of extra sort of narrative things that are placed on top of them. And like, we literally would not do sports without those things. I made this point a few weeks ago when we were talking about the difference between men's sports coverage and women's sports coverage, that there's no legitimate argument to say that the quality of the play is better on one side or the other. I mean, to be honest, the women's championship game was much better than the men's championship game, right? And we've talked about reasons why college men's basketball isn't as fun to watch as it could be, but maybe what's not happening is the production of those narratives for women's sports as much as for men's sports, right? So another example of this sort of discursive identification with a team would be sort of the underdog story that we placed on Loyola or something like that, right? So we do this all the time. It's the way that we make meaningful sports.
I love that. I love that kind of summary, and I think that's a good place to pivot towards this professional wrestling talk, because I tend to think that professional wrestling, the increased popularity of that sport over the last 50 or 60 years, has to have some sort of correlation to just the public emotional or public disposition, the social disposition. I'm not sure what you want to call it, like just the feeling of the nation or the people who are watching that sport. And so when you and I were watching the Andre the Giant documentary, and I thought about, in that moment, right, in the kind of late 70s moment, what does Andre the Giant stand for? What does professional wrestling stand for? And, of course, that increases throughout it was almost like that increase during the Reagan administration. It was almost as if the spectacle was some sort of outlet for people in this kind of button up, decade of American politics. And now I'm wondering, and there was a good article, and I sent it to you from the Journal, I think, of Film and Video, about the new narrative in professional wrestling, which is the kind of backs. It's called, do you remember the word? I knew it. It's this, there's a certain word in the professional wrestling lexicon, and I'll have to find it here in a second. But basically, you start a scene in the locker room, and that scene then plays out eventually on the mat. And so there's something about the breaking down of boundaries that these the millennial, the post-millennial generation, we'll call it, appreciates. And I think we saw that over the weekend with WrestleMania and just the mass popularity or increased popularity of Ronda Rousey. There's something going on now, I guess is what I'm saying, with the popularity of professional wrestling. And yes, it is popular. You can't look at TV ratings. I was actually reading an article in Deadspin this morning that was discussing that TV ratings are really, or Forbes, I'm sorry, or maybe I think it was Forbes. TV ratings are a really bad way to assess the popularity of sports anymore. And they were kind of talking about professional wrestling in particular. But anyhow, right, to sum up what I'm saying, there's something going on here. I think a lot of it has to do with the political climate that is making professional wrestling and that recognizable spectacle that it is a kind of a nice outlet for people, right? Especially people in a very certain kind of demographic that we ourselves fall into. But I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah. No, I mean that totally makes sense and resonates for me. I mean, I kind of want to jump back to what you were talking about before, sort of, and just tie it in with the idea of sort of needing a narrative to kind of identify with sports. That idea that we sort of start in the locker room, and that kind of has to carry over out onto the mat is a really interesting idea, right? That you have to have that backstory. You have to have someone like. You want to identify with the hero, or you want to identify with the foil or the heel or whatever. So I mean that's a fascinating concept to me. In terms of the viewership, I'll be really honest. We haven't talked about Andre the Giant yet. I know that's coming up in the next section. I'm not a WWE guy. I don't watch professional wrestling. It's never really been a thing for me. But I will say this: as a kid, I did, right? And I think based on that documentary, just kind of came up at it came up at the right time, right? I was born in 1981, so I think that was sort of the 80s were really kind of the coming of age for what I remember as the WWF. And I remember all of these, big personalities and being able to get into it and watch it. And I've totally moved away from it, but pretty quickly in middle school, something that I just stopped paying any attention to. I don't even have a good explanation as to why, but and this is a little bit of self-confession. I've always wondered, like the past few years, I'm like, who still watches this? Like I've always seen people get excited about it, or by accident you're watching TV and Monday Night Raw comes in or something like that. I'm like, who are the adults that are going and paying for this to sort of watch this product? In my head, I probably had an unfair stereotype about who was watching it and why, and just like, how can you get into this? It's so obviously fake and that sort of stuff. But watching the Andre documentary just sort of brought me back to like, oh yeah, no, it was super fun. Like I totally remember, it was total nostalgia for me, but I remember, loving it in the exact same way that people do. So, I mean, maybe that there's an element of that too, that maybe it does sort of target a specific demographic, or maybe it doesn't at all. And that's just a bad assumption that I need to check my, my unconscious bias there.
No, I think that's good. I think that's good. I mean, there is something about the carnivalesque nature of not just Andre the Giant, but of professional wrestling as a whole. And if we go back and we think about, some of the critical studies scholars out there who have talked about the carnivalesque and what that means and why we go to circuses and why we, like shows, if you will. This is a fantastic example, right? Of maybe that's why this thing is popular. It's because it's serving as an outlet in this moment for not having to think about the politics that are going on, or even like the introduction of politics in the professional sports that we like, football, especially with kneeling and protests and all of this. It's almost as if professional wrestling is now, once again, that thing that allows us to ignore or avoid, or at least be able to look past, not have to think about all the really crappy things that are happening in our country in this moment. So I think you're definitely spot on there. We'll have to. Do you have any comments to kind of end there before we jump into Andre the Giant?
No, I think that makes total sense. What you were just talking about. I wanted to jump back to again. Sorry, I'm not staying right on point with you. I keep.
No, you're fine.
Of other things, but another thing that I think that you mentioned that's interesting is sort of when we talk about the carnivalesque atmosphere that is. Professional sort of wrestling. I was thinking both of, again, that Andre documentary where they mentioned, and I didn't know this, I don't know if you did, that's where this style of wrestling came from, that it was sort of like a sideshow thing that was born out of carnivals and traveling circuses and that sort of stuff. So once you sort of know that was the kind of origin story of professional wrestling, a lot of the stuff that goes on there makes a ton of sense. And I don't know if we've talked about this on the radio show or podcast before we were on the air. But I know I've told you about this before. I'm out here in mid-Michigan, and the county that I live in has a county fair every year. And one of the best things about the county fair is that there's air quotes semi-professional wrestling. I don't think they're making any money at this county fair, where it's these people who just love WWE, WWF wrestling, and they basically go out and they do it for crowds of 7 or 8 or 9 people, and it's wrestlers as young as what look like 16, 17, 18 years old, but there's also there's like a 75-year-old wrestler out there who fights under the name sort of Father Time. So I think you're right. I think there is this, like, it's really just meant to be this kind of opportunity for kind of fun for fun's sake. It's sort of silly, but embraces its silliness. It's a sort of melodramatic, right? Everything is a caricature of how you would really act every time someone gets punched. They react like, they got hit by a ton of bricks, or, like if you're reacting to pain, you have to do it times 10, right? All of that sort of stuff. So there really is sort of a fun kind of playful release element of it. And I mean, you can sort of compare and contrast kind of the main stage modern day WWE, Monday Night Raw, whatever, with sort of this more micro version of it at a county fair, but they're doing the exact same thing, right? They're serving the exact same purpose.
Sure. All right, let's stop there. We'll return in conversation about Andre. All right, I'll jump in here and start our conversation. So HBO, again, aired a documentary this weekend, a very much publicized documentary, and I think promoted for months and weeks for sure prior to airing, just called Andre the Giant. It was just about Andre the Giant. And we can jump into it, Brian, but I just wanted to say at the outset, I was really moved by this documentary. Like, it reminded me of my childhood. It reminded me of A Princess Bride. And it was hard to not like Andre the Giant, right? Even his daughter, in those, he's kind of interviewing his daughter, right? She knew what her dad was doing his best. And I don't know, man, it was just, I felt really nostalgic and kind of really, really emotional about it all. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was great.
I had the exact same reaction. I was not. I mean, you've been looking forward to this thing for months. You've been talking about it, and I'll be honest, I kind of forgot. And we watched that documentary. We'll talk about it on the radio show. And I went to watch it, and I was not super amped to do it. I mean, honestly, in my mind, I have vague recollections of Andre the Giant wrestling when I was a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, maybe even younger than that. And then Princess Bride. Like that's my main sort of point of reference for Andre the Giant, which to me makes him, obviously he's, you know, one of the best things about the Princess Bride. But I absolutely loved the documentary. It was fantastic. It'll make you laugh and it'll make you cry, which I guess is the point. And it really does kind of humanize not just Andre, but, you know, kind of wrestlers as a whole. We were talking before we went on the air about, you know, there's a lot of Hulk Hogan in there, and you know, our more kind of recent memories of Hulk Hogan are, you know, getting caught up in the sex tape nonsense and suing Gawker and all of that business. But this goes back, and he just looks like a human being, and it's a really nice sort of pulling back the curtain to look at and think about wrestling. And it also doesn't seem to really have an agenda, which I think is fantastic. I kept waiting for there to be, you know, some sort of angle that they were working toward, but there doesn't seem to be. I think it's just about Andre. And it was fantastic.
It was nice to see the personal side, the real side, the authentic side of many of these caricatures who, for at least 25, 30 years, we have just been force-fed. I don't want to say force-fed because I'm, you know, obviously patting the back of professional wrestling in this episode. But, you know, we were presented with Vince McMahon, right, and being this hard-ass boss that, you know, was egomaniacal. We were presented with Hulk Hogan throughout his career as, you know, obviously Hulkamania and the Hulkster and all of this, but never really a kind of feeling, sensing human being. But I mean, that opening interview with Hulk Hogan talking about Andre and what he meant to him, and also that Andre had kind of introduced him to the sport, like it was just really, really cool. It was really cool. And, you know, them telling the stories of, you know, I found the story, you like the story of Andre's farts. I think you chuckled at that one.
I was Googling before we did this. I'm not sure if you can say fart on the radio. They kept saying flatulence. Are we getting,
yes.
Are we going to get in trouble for saying fart?
No, I think we could say fart. I think we're fine there. I'm not too worried about it. You could tell that story. I just wanted when he was the Andre Macho Man Randy Savage story where he like told what no baby oil. Like no baby oil. I thought that was hilarious. Yeah. Oh, that was good. That was good. So you know, come away with
about Andre the Giant crop dusting a plane and, you know, pilots struggling to keep their eyes open. I mean, that's fantastic. Who can't laugh at that?
I know you can't. So, I mean, I guess if we were going to say why now, why this documentary right now, why does HBO, why does Bill Simmons decide to make this movie right now? What kind of answers? Yeah, I think he was the producer on it. Wow. So, like, what? We're rhetoricians. What is the persuasive function of this movie? And because it's getting circulated everywhere. Like people are watching this who didn't like All-Star Wrestling, who don't like sports. But again, you have a cultural phenomenon, right? That's who Andre the Giant was. He was a cultural phenomenon for 15 years. And now this comes out, and there's to me, we're going to look back on it, and maybe now we start this conversation. What does it mean? Yeah. What is it doing?
The first half of this documentary is just backstory, nostalgia, and funny stories about baby oil and farting and drinking too much, right? But it does turn the last half or the last third of the documentary it's sad, right? I mean, you learn obviously that Andre the Giant had they said the technical name, but I can't remember it, but basically gigantism, right? He, you know, had a growth on his pituitary gland or something that overproduced HGH or testosterone or something that made him sort of grow kind of uncontrollably. And that, you know, for most people that have that, it's a death sentence, right? Or at least that's my kind of basic understanding. Don't quote me. I'm not that kind of a doctor. And so like that's part of it that you grapple with. That he was, you know, kind of continue to grow forever, and that at some point, you know, he was going to become so big that his organs, his joints were not going to be able to sort of carry him. So that's part of the story, right? Is kind of the rise, but also the decline and fall of Andre the Giant, which you know, kind of puts in perspective a lot of the stuff that happens in the first half. You learn that Andre the Giant was a really heavy drinker, which in the beginning of the documentary is framed as like, well, he's a huge guy, right? You know, he eats a lot of food, he drinks a lot. So if he drinks, he's going to drink a lot. By the end, what we're kind of learning is, you know, Andre the Giant was in a bunch of pain and he was kind of self-medicating and that sort of stuff. We learned a story about his daughter, who he was, you know, I don't know if estranged is the right word, but was certainly, because he traveled around a lot, not a constant presence in her life, which was really sad. I think the biggest thing that we learn is that Andre the Giant was revered, right, by wrestling fans and probably by everybody. I think people who at least if you said Andre the Giant remember him would say, yeah, Andre the Giant was awesome. But we also learned that he got mocked a lot, that it was difficult for him to go out in public because he constantly got attention. Sometimes it was positive, but other times it was negative. And then he kind of goes from being this perpetual winner inside of the ring and undefeated for 15 years or whatever, to the way he goes out at the end of his career is losing to Hulk Hogan. And even though we talked about how we need these narratives to sort of make sense, they create a sense making function. They give us a sense making function to glean onto and to understand what's happening in sports, but that people will carry over and take those two things, that sometimes take those things seriously, right? I don't know enough about wrestling, but I know there's a more modern day example of a wrestler who, his character and his storyline was one where the fan, he was understood to be a villain, a bad guy or whatever, but he had an interaction where fans came up to him outside of the wrestling match context, and he had a physical altercation. Someone who knows more about wrestling could tell us the name of that guy. But the same sort of stuff happened to Andre the Giant, right? That once he became sort of the heel or the foil or whatever, that even if it was, kind of in good fun, like, boo, Andre the Giant, you're a bad guy now, you switched sides and betrayed Hulk Hogan or whatever, that sort of combined with the fact that he physically looked different and drew a lot of attention and kind of couldn't escape it was something that kind of weighed heavily on him. And I think that's something that, while it's true and it was a bigger, no pun intended, but it was a bigger deal with Andre the Giant, is also true of celebrities and high profile people and athletes, that sometimes fans have difficulty kind of giving them privacy and respecting that privacy and realizing that the things they do on the field or on TV are not 100% their identity, that they are other things as well. And the history is rife with examples of people who sort of regret their celebrity status because it means that they can never ever kind of retreat from it. And that's a lot of the story that you get in this documentary too, is kind of Andre sort of having to deal with that sort of stuff. So I think it tells us a lot about Andre, right? It's awesome to hear the story, and it's funny, but it's also sad. But I think it also is instructive to the way that we think about our relationship with sports more generally.
I think that's a really good assessment. I want to tag one last component to that. There is this, obviously Andre is larger than life. He's mythical. Eric Kemp, who's following us on Facebook right now, our Facebook Live, kind of mentions this too. So thanks, Eric. He is, right? He's big on screen. He's big in the mat. He's a giant, literally, as a human being, but as a personality. But there's something human about him that he was out front and obvious about from the very beginning of his career in the United States, or even in France, right? There was something personal about him. So it wasn't like, to me, what was nice about this movie is it wasn't the stereotypical fall from grace that I mean, at least that's not how I read it, that you get with a lot of professional athletes or celebrities. It was just the kind of decline mentally, physically, personally of a human being that was, in a lot of ways, other than his size, just like us. And I think, to me, that was kind of cool. It was different. It was well done in that sense. But we'll come back in a second, and then I want to hear your response to that. Okay, Brian, so I was just talking about, the humanity of Andre the Giant, kind of what he stood for. Was that your sense of the flick too? I mean, or of the story, or am I off base?
No. I think it was definitely that. I think that it's not very heavy-handed, right? You have to read between the lines a little bit, but I think ultimately what they said was it's very easy to sort of only see the performance that person's putting on and not think that there's other stuff kind of happening behind the curtains, or whatever metaphor you want here, between the lines, that there's other stuff that's happening on kind of a deeper level. And I think that's what they were trying to do, was say, hey, we all remember kind of what I said before, like, you probably remember Andre the Giant from WWF and fighting Hulk Hogan and Princess Bride, but there was other stuff too. right? And I think that's what it was an attempt to show, and it balances those two things nicely.
All right, we have one last segment here. I wanted to just have a conversation about Ronda Rousey and this weekend's WrestleMania. We are not a professional wrestling show, so it's kind of funny that we've spent this entirety of talking about professional wrestling, but I think this is a nice way to kind of circle back to our initial conversation about Conor McGregor and UFC. So if you haven't been paying attention, which this has made, relatively mainstream sports discourse conversation, Ronda Rousey, she performed on Sunday night at WrestleMania to a massive crowd. People loved it. All of the commentators in and out of professional wrestling thought she did a fantastic job. They're calling it like the smartest career pivot that we've ever seen in professional sports. Have you been able to read any of this stuff and kind of catch yourself up on what happened and what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit. I'll have to defer to you on this one a little bit, but
okay.
I mean, kind of basically what's going on.
I guess to me, it was nice to kind of see this happen and see the success because, like I pointed out at the beginning of the show, MMA, UFC in particular, has become such a spectacle without recognizing it. The lack of self-awareness is extremely annoying to me for UFC as an organization. I don't mean their fans. I mean as an organization. But to me, this move by Ronda Rousey is in a lot of ways becoming the star that she had intended to be, but by doing it on her own without having to have, Dana White basically shepherd that growth. We'll have to get L.A. Jennings on the show, who she's been on there before, and she's a female fighting sport historian, and she could probably add to this way more than Brian and I can. But I mean, I think that seems to be the positive reading of WrestleMania is that Ronda Rousey, right, is now, along with, I guess Vince McMahon and Kurt Angle, major power players in WWE, taking her career by the horns and not basically allowing Dana White to manipulate it or to do something that she doesn't want to. And I think to me, that's kind of cool. I need to read more, from maybe some female commentators to see what their perspective is. But there's something people really seem to appreciate by her performance over the weekend.
Yeah, no, I mean that all makes total sense to me. I wonder if there's and I could be way off base here. So if I say something stupid, feel free to tweet at me and tell me that I'm wrong. Like I wonder if there's kind of an implicit tension between. I need to choose my language carefully here, like real fight sports versus pretend fight sports. I don't know if that makes sense, but. I wonder if there's kind of a tension here between like the UFC and the WWE, right? Does that make sense? That this is seen as a coup for the WWE because they, they're essentially, I don't know, I was going to say poaching, but that's the wrong word. But they're seeing UFC is seeing one of its biggest stars leave to go to the WWE. If there's like a tension between these two to say fighting for the kind of patronage or the souls of the viewing public, that this is can be seen as kind of a win for them. I don't know if that's true. I haven't read that anywhere, but I suspect and this isn't the first crossover either, right? Who was the huge dude with a sword tattooed on his chest who was a WWE guy? Brock Lesnar. Right? He was a ginormous man. Not quite Andre the Giant size, but huge, who went to the UFC and was okay, I guess, and then ended up going back, right? So I think it can fit into a broader narrative about sort of what's a better fight sport, right? And so that might be a lot of the reaction to Ronda Rousey. And I didn't watch the WrestleMania 34, and I've only seen kind of clips from tweets or whatever, and it looks like she did a fine job, but I honestly wouldn't know if she did a good job or not. The article you sent me about Ronda Rousey from Forbes, it's got a bunch of people tweeting about it, right? Look at it, like, oh, look how good she did, right? Like one of these things shows Dana White's there, so he seems to be on board with all of this. But one of the tweets is from Jeopardy Sports, which is that still going on with what's his bucket?
Dan Patrick,
yeah. And the thing that they posted on Twitter said the Jeopardy clue they posted was apparently all this former UFC fighter needed to start winning again was to have the result be completely scripted in advance. And the answer is, who is Rhonda Rousey? And it's like, man, ouch! Like that's funny and it's playful, but once again, it sort of is touching in on this exact same theme, which I think is a real big deal for a lot of people that they can't get involved in something if the conclusion, if it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah. Okay. It does. It does make a lot of sense. We have. Yeah. Have you listened to? So there was a Radio Lab from a few years ago called the Montreal Screw Job. You ever heard that episode?
I listened to this on Radio Lab when it came out, but I cannot for the life of me remember what it was about.
It had something to do with Bret Hart, I believe, and I think
was that the story that I told of the guy who got in a fight?
Yeah. So Bret Hart was supposed to be.
I heard it.
Mm-hmm. He was supposed to be the fall guy, and he kind of refused to do it. Right? I can't remember who it was. Shane Michaels, maybe Sugar Shane, was trying to be the next superstar, and I think Bret Hart just refused to be the fall guy. So, but what the story that Radio Lab gets into is not so much the spectacle itself, but how wrestling fans kind of squared the circle about it.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about that kind of mental processing that is happening now, to return to our conversation, and maybe the decline of UFC's popularity, the increased popularity of professional wrestling, that it's the acknowledgement of the fakeness that we appreciate, especially in a political moment in which we have a president who fails to acknowledge that what he's saying isn't true. It's nice to hear. Does that make sense to you? Like, maybe that's what people are drawn to. It's just nice to hear. It's nice to have people say, this is fake. We acknowledge it's fake. Just enjoy it, right? Just enjoy it. And so what happens, I mean, I don't mean to get political on this, but I think that's what Trump stood for in 2015 and 2016 is it was a spectacle that people just kind of liked watching. It was like a train wreck. And then all of a sudden that train wreck became reality. And there are a lot of, regrets that are happening. And maybe there's a correlation between that. There's definitely a similarity between that and what we're seeing right now in this kind of cultural moment that is impacted by the WWE and UFC. I don't know. That's my take. Maybe we'll have to write a paper on this someday.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes total sense. Like going back to, I mentioned the weird sort of sideshow wrestling that happens at the county fair every year. Like this is maybe the best example of what you're talking about. They literally sell raffle tickets so they can raise money to go around and do their wrestling. And if you win the raffle, you get to pick who wins the final match, right? Mm-hmm. It's not even like an open secret. Like they're profiting off of the fact that it's fake, right? It means that you can give the fans what you want. One of the guys they interviewed throughout the Andre documentary sort of talked about this too, kind of like knowing that it was fake, but simultaneously being really concerned about what the outcome was going to be, right? Instead of being like, well, we don't have to worry about what the outcome is. It's not like a million different things can happen. They're going to pick what happens, and that's what's going to happen. Instead, you would still stress about it, right? So there really is this kind of, I can't reconcile that I know that it's not a real thing with my investment in the storyline, right? That's willing suspension of disbelief. Yeah,
that's good.
I think you're right. It happening in other places. You can probably find similar, that dynamic playing out in politics or in non sort of sporting ways, in non-sport context, I suppose.
Well, I think that's a good spot to end. Let's also not pretend that professional wrestlers are not athletes, because I think that's the one crazy thing, or one of the crazy things from that documentary is when Andre the Giant was just beating the hell out of the Iron Sheik because he didn't like him. And it was very clear to me that the Iron Sheik was in a lot of pain. Like, you can't just fake that. Like, he was. And so this stuff isn't always, fake. No. It takes athletes to do it.
I remember knowing wrestling was fake when I was a kid, but I would still always ask my dad over and over again. I was like, did that hurt? And he would always answer the same thing. He would say, it didn't feel good. Like, it's fake, but they're still beating each other up. Yeah. Like,
that's
fake
good.
doesn't mean he didn't just body slam that dude.
Exactly. All right, buddy. It's a good spot to end for today. Shout out to our sponsors, to Guardian Tax Consulting and Westerfield and Martin Law and Orange Collar Media, to our brewery partnerships, Fermentra, Lost Highway, and Grist. So thanks for those underwriters. Who else am I missing, Brian?
Who we're missing? J Communication Solutions.
Oh yeah, well, sure. I guess mine.
Are we missing another one?
No, that could be it. Thanks to Ronnie.
I apologize.
Yes, thanks to Ronnie K, our producer. We really appreciate the time you put in, buddy. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed the show. You can follow us on Facebook, fb.me/sportsnerds, or on Twitter @_sportsnerds, and also on Instagram. We are @sports.nerds. Brian, you have a great day.
You too. See ya.
See you later. Bye. Shit, cancel. Is it not gonna do it again?
Don't do it again. Once again I have nothing on the bottom. Maybe they just change it where it doesn't show it on my end anymore.
This says it is uploading yours.
But nothing on my end. It's not showing it at all. It was also like weirdly the screen looked fuzzy the entire time it was recording. And I don't know what was up with that, but it was too late to stop. Are we still live Facebooking?
Oh yeah, we should end that. And end. Thanks everybody.
So no one really watched that, huh? I mean, it's also the middle of the day on a Thursday.